Thank you very much for having invited me together with Teresa. It's an honor. So today I'm going to talk about personality and how the dislike for inequality helps to explain other phenomena. So basically, this line of research, what they do is they look at, we look, or some other people also look, at the importance of personality on shaping individual preferences, and that would mean also shaping individual behavior and, for example, voting behavior, right? So individuals' behavior, like going to vote for an election, may depend on individuals' personality. And to a certain extent, individual personality may be inborn. So it may be that political attitudes of people are already inborn personality traits. So in this case, I will only look at the preferences for inequalities, whether people like or dislike inequality, and whether preferences for inequality can be linked to preferences for risk, right? But I have also other papers in which what we do is we look at other personality traits. For example, one of the well-known personality traits used in economics is the locus of control. Locus of control means how much people think their life is on their own control and how much is outside. So, for example, an individual that is external, it's those individuals that think that external individuals are those that think that life is run by others, so important decisions in life are not made by themselves. For example, nepotism could be a reason for believing that there is external locus of control. Individuals that have an internal locus of control are those individuals that think that effort, for example, is important in determining success. So what now the literature has seen is that locus of control has a lot of importance on, for example, determining job search of individuals. So individuals that have an internal locus of control will search more intensely and will find better jobs. Or, for example, they will educate themselves better. And now even research shows that the locus of control of parents will determine children's outcomes. So those parents that are externals, those parents that think that effort doesn't matter as much as luck or good connections, will put less investment into their children, right? So parents that have internal locus of control devote more time to their children and their children develop better. This is something for Hannes, by the way. He likes children development. And then, so that's, for example, one thing we do. So locus of control, we have also looked at locus of control and inequality aversion, and we have also found a very strong relationship between individual locus of control and whether they like or dislike inequality, okay? But this paper is about risk, so I'm gonna mix things here. So there is a lot of evidence in the literature that there is a significant part of the population that they dislike inequality. So they prefer to live in more equal societies than the average inequality in Western Europe or US and Australia, right? So there is both. There is experimental evidence that individuals dislike inequality per se, so not only depending on the effort that you make to get this reward, but also the fact that there is inequality. There is also survey evidence. So, for example, using what I'm going to also use here, using the happiness question, it has been shown that individuals that live in regions or countries with higher inequality, holding everything else constant, they are unhappier with their life than those individuals that live in more equal societies, right? So that would be the survey evidence. And all the work with Alesina, La Ferrara, etc. also shows that individuals, there is a large percentage of individuals that have preference for redistribution. So individuals like to redistribute income. It has also been shown that these preferences for redistribution are heterogeneous. So it is not true that we all want to redistribute income. Some people are more inequality averse than other individuals, right? So, for example, one of the examples I was telling you before, it's the locus of control, which is not in this paper. So there are different reasons why people may dislike inequality. So one reason could be because you think you have a higher probability to end up at the bottom of the income distribution, right? In that case, dislike for inequality would depend only on own measures of future prospects. In that case, low-income, low-educated individuals, for example, would tend to dislike inequality most because they have a larger probability to end up at the bottom of the distribution. That, for example, there is this paper of Ben Abu that talks about this. There is also other reasons, and I was telling you at the beginning about the locus of control, and it has been found that there is also a link between fairness and dislike for inequality. So in those societies that individuals think that the income distribution is an outcome of effort, people tend to be less inequality averse. For example, in the US, individuals think that they live in a mobile society. This is not true because Europe is more mobile than the US, but people don't know that. People in the US think that your own circumstances matter less to your final outcome, right? If you run a regression, your parents' education matter more for your own education in the US than in Europe, but that's wrong beliefs the Americans have. So then one would expect that in the US, the dislike for inequality would be lower, because they feel that inequality is the outcome of a fair process. We all think somehow that if inequality depends on effort, then it will be fair. It's a fair inequality. And fair inequality would be that inequality that comes from, connections or family background, etc. So if we do not all have the same equal opportunities, if we don't have the same opportunities in life, then this would be an unfair inequality. Well, locus of control, it's a personality measure that it's linked to a certain extent to this view, right? So internal individuals, it's a personality trait, and to that extent, it's not institutional or it's not context dependent, it's more how you are born, right? So there are people that do think that effort is important. These people tend to be very hard workers because they think that the more effort they put, things will get better. Those individuals then, in a way, maybe dislike inequality less, right? Because they believe that if you work hard, you can achieve more. So then they link inequality to the fair process. In the same way, another reason why you may dislike inequality is given your own prospects, given your own income, of course, we do not all have the same risk attitudes. So some of us, I'm, for example, fairly risk averse. So I'm a risk averse individual, so even if I have high education, maybe I assign a larger probability to end up at the bottom of the income distribution than someone else in my same position, right? So in that sense, if risk attitudes differ across individuals, one would expect that this would shape income inequality. And that's the basic question of this paper, is to look whether it is true that risk inequality, that risk attitudes will determine inequality preferences, right? Imagine that you are under the veil of ignorance. If you are a very risk-averse person, and they tell you in which society do you want to end up, risk-averse individuals will choose to be born in a more equal society, right? Because they are afraid of ending up in a bad position. So in that sense, we should find a link between risk attitudes and inequality aversion. And of course, in theory, this is also the same, because when you write the utility function, risk aversion and inequality aversion are determined by the same parameter. So theoretically, this is clear, and in this paper, we test empirically whether this is the case. That's all. Okay. So as I say, we want to look at a personality trait. We want to look risk attitudes in a way is also personality trait. There is, of course, and I'm going to abstain from all this discussion here, but there is, of course, the whole thing on how much is an inborn trait or how much you develop these personality traits over your life course, right? So it is considered that before 40, personality can change, and it will change depending on your life outcomes. So if everything goes well in your life, it might be that you become more risk taker, right? So abstaining for all these, let us now here assume for a 25-minute presentation, let's now assume that personality trait is time constant, is time persistent, and therefore I take it here as an exogenous measure. So it's not a self-fulfilling prophecy. It is in my case here, I'm not going to say that it is. So what I'm going to say is that risk takers individuals are going to be rich. And that's going to be it. It's not true that rich people are also going to become more risk takers, which is, of course, also true. Yeah, but this is for simplifying. So here, in this, here I'm mixing all the time. You see that I have risk attitudes and I have locus of controls, and I put the two papers here together. So now here, I'm gonna say. I'm gonna use the measure here of locus of control, because locus of control, what I say again, resembles this political attitude, right? So there is questions in what is the pointer here?
It's on the top.
Oh yeah, this one. So there is papers in the literature that they talk about fairness and unfairness, and they realize that individuals who think that the income distribution is fair, those individuals will be more inequality lovers, right? So what I do here is I take this local of control and I see whether this will explain my inequality aversion. To measure inequality aversion, how am I going to do that? You can ask individuals whether you want to redistribute income. You can ask individuals whether they like or dislike inequality, but that can generate some bias. So what we do in this paper and what does some of the literature is I use a self-reported life satisfaction. So I take individuals' life satisfaction and I take individual life satisfaction as a proxy measure for utility. And then I look whether the Gini, whether the inequality of the region has an effect on my life satisfaction. So if I find a negative coefficient of the Gini on my life satisfaction, I'm going to claim that individuals are inequality averse on average. And then what I do, I seek how these non-cognitive skills, how locus of control, and if I have time, how risk, attitudes will shape my inequality aversion. Okay? So I don't want to spend a lot of time on this, but for those of you, you are now already writing your thesis, and I don't think you will change our topic now, but maybe for later on, if you are interested, there is a large literature that examines, what I was saying before, the role of personality on shaping individual behavior. So if you are interested here, there is a list that I can give to you later, in which they indeed look at any personality trait, how it affects labor market and education outcomes, and how it affects individual behavior. So even teenage pregnancy or smoking depends on your personality trait. And then on locus of control specifically, we also have some papers that look at the same thing. What I was saying, individuals that have an external locus of control, they will search less for a new job. So they will have a higher possibility to remain unemployed. So in this paper, I use the German data set with this representative panel data. It's a household panel data that is started in '84 and includes East Germany since 1991 after the fall of the war. It contains individual and household characteristics, which I'm going to use, and a life satisfaction question every year. In addition, and because of personality traits gaining a lot of importance in not only in psychology, but also in other social sciences, this data set introduced since 2005 some personality measures. So they have, after 2005, they have risk measures, they have locus of control measures, and they have the Big Five question, which is here, I'm not going to use it at all, but I also, for example, have some research in the Big Five, using the Big Five personality traits, which is extroversion, agreeableness, etc. So the Big Five typical ones. And this paper can only use 2 years of this data set for the locus of control, because the locus of control was only asked in 2005 and again in 2010. So this is how the life satisfaction runs. So in all these questionnaires, people are asked how satisfied you are with your life in general, and then you have to rank from 0 to 10, where 0 means totally unhappy, and 10 means totally happy. So now each of you can think the number where you are in. So Teresa and Ines and I are already here, and you are so young, so you are here. But you'll get there, don't worry. But you are going downhill now, eh? Until 45, you will go downhill, and only then you will go uphill. Hannes knows everything about it, by the way. So Hannes has a paper on the U-shape, why happiness has this U-shape. So this is how it distributes in society. So typically in Western societies, people are very happy. The mode is at 8, right? And there is really very few people at the bottom of the happiness level. That, of course, makes sense, because I always think that we are pre-programmed to be happy and to keep going, right? So if we wouldn't be pre-programmed like this, our maybe genes would be already dead, because we would have maybe already jumped from the 6th floor. So we will not be in the questionnaire. Now, in order to use these questions, there are 2 main assumptions that you have to impose. So the first assumption is measurability. So it has to be the case that individuals are willing and able, both, to give you a meaningful answer. And when I mean a meaningful answer, in economics, I mean that it proxies utility, because I'm using this as a proxy of utility. So I need to assume that if someone tells me 8, his utility or her utility is an 8. And the other thing I need to assume is that it's interpersonal comparable at an ordinal or cardinal level. It doesn't matter. So if I say I'm an 8 and someone else is a 4, this person is less happy than I am, either twice or just less happy, right? And that's very different, and that's very important. That's very different to say that. It's very different than use this number to make welfare judgments, right? So one of the criticisms that has been done in the happiness literature is that if people would adapt, right, then everybody would be happy, even if they are poor. Let's assume poor people adapt. So you are an 8, then you get very poor, and after 1 or 2 years, you go back to your 8. Right? If we would use this 8 to make welfare judgments, we would not have to redistribute income, in the extreme case where everybody would adapt. Right? So as an answer to this, the happiness literature, they would give you, well, not everybody, but people like me would give you 2 answers. The first answer is that, as I said, I don't think we should use this 8 to make welfare decisions. It's not a welfare measure. I think we should use this 8 to understand individuals' preferences, to follow individuals across time, and to understand indeed if people adapt. If people adapt, we still want to redistribute income. It's just now we know what happens to people. The second answer would be is that people don't adapt as much as it was always believed, right? So even if we would use this 8 as to make welfare judgments, it would be much precautionary than it was ever thought. So up until 2005, 2010, many researchers believed that people were able to adapt to everything, right? Now we have better data. We have, for the first time, long panel data, and the literature has found that individuals do not adapt to everything. So, for example, individuals that get unemployed, they are unhappier than 5 years. We can follow people over time, but of course with some limitation, because there is attrition. So about 5 years is how long we can follow individuals, and unemployed individuals, 5 years after the first shock, they are still unhappier than they were, even if re-employed again. So people do not adapt to unemployment. People also don't adapt to poverty. There is a recent article by Clark and Ambrosio in which they look at whether people cross the threshold of poverty, and once you have crossed the threshold of poverty, you remain unhappier hereafter. People adapt to income changes, but not if you cross certain threshold, right? Anyway, so in any case, you need these 2 assumptions. And then for this assumption, for interpersonal comparability, the empirical evidence would say that this is a relatively soft assumption, because they have been testing whether people can predict each other's happiness. So if we can compare happiness, it means that there is a common shared concept of happiness. And indeed, if you take a picture of someone and you ask this person how happy she is, once you show this picture to someone else within the same culture, this other person is able to predict the happiness level of this person just by looking at a picture of her. So it seems that we know what it means to be happy, and for us it is the same thing everywhere within the culture. For measurability, there is also a lot of evidence. So the first evidence in the literature was done by psychologists, and was more based on whether, happiness related to objective situation of the individuals. But when economists entered the field, their main objective was to show that individuals behave to maximize the happiness question. So if we say that happiness is a proxy for utility, it has to be the case that individuals behave so as to maximize this answer to the happiness question. So, for example, there is a lot of papers, and I'm not going to go through all of them, but the one that all my young students like the most, and since most of you are young, I'm going to tell you this one, is Senik et al. They found that the satisfaction gap between spouses the year of the marriage predicts future divorce 5 years and 6 years after. So when you are to marry, you have to ask your wife-to-be how happy she is, and if she is happier than you should stop the wedding. If he is happier, then that doesn't matter that much. So basically, the most important thing is whether the woman is happier than the man, yeah? So that's my advice for you. I have much more advice about children, everything. Anything you need to know, send me an email. And there is a lot of things. There is this paper by Marc Florbe and Hannes again. Now, Hannes, you are getting so much credit today. I don't know if you can sleep tonight.
You're stealing all my bottom lines here.
Sure. Okay, let's go. Locus of control. This one, he's gonna tell you. So, locus of control is, as I say, is the degree to which individuals feel the control of their life is on their own hands, effort, these are internal individuals, or depends on external factors such as luck, external. So let me already tell you that all of you who are here are internal, otherwise you wouldn't be here. The measure in the soup, it's, you have, doesn't matter. External is measured with 6 items. These are the 6 items, and then you can rank from 1 to 7, whether you agree or you don't agree. Now, this, we add up, and then we make a measure of external locus of control, right? So if you feel you don't have control over your life, you give me a 7, and then your measure of external locus of control increases, okay? So that's our measure of locus of control. Now, again, stability and causality, I want to abstain of this here, but basically, most of the literature argues that personality changes are modest after age of 40, not before age of 40. What before age of 40 there is a lot of discussion, there is no agreement, okay? And then, in any case, our point here is you have a personality measure that resembles something that is political attitudes that will determine how much you dislike inequality and therefore your voting behavior. And if this is a personality measure that is inborn, there is a lot you can do before 40, but there is not much you can do after that. So in a way, the point of this paper is, hey, there are personality measures that can determine also your behavior in voting and in, in the outcomes of a country like the Brexit and things like this. It is true that there are differences on cultural differences, perhaps. So this is a precautionary note, but still, the differences on locus of control, for example, within Europe and Europe versus the US are really very small. So the percentage of individuals that are external, the distribution of locus of control in Europe is very similar than in the US. While in the US, people think they live in a mobile society, and we think we don't, right? And then most important is that there is a lot of work that they argue that the locus of control are especially concentrated among the young, so indeed age is a determinant of locus of control, but they do not appear to be correlated with life events such as, becoming unemployed and things like this. So this is all I'm going to say about exogeneity. So you can see indeed, these are the differences. So this is our data in the German soup, and this is the difference of the locus of control, where locus of control goes from 6 to 42. There are 6 questions, and each question can go from 1 to 7. You remember those 6 questions? So it can go from 6 to 42. So 42 is if you are very external. This is the difference between 2010 and 2005 of those 42 possible values by age. So this is the mean difference by age, and then you can see this is 0. So you can see that there is a bit of a change indeed, but still, this is 2 and 2 and minus 2. So it's not that it changes that much. So what we do, even if the mean in our sample is all, what we do here to try to fix it is we regress locus of control on a 4th order polynomial in age, and then we include individual fixed effects, and then the predicted values, the predicted individual fixed effect of this regression, so the part of this regression that is time constant, because I have 2 years, that is time constant and is not explained by age, is our measure of locus of control. So with this, what we do is we achieve to have a measure of locus of control that is time fixed and is not age dependent, okay? And this will be our measure of locus of control in our regressions. So once we have that, what we do is we regress life satisfaction on Gini of the federal state at each time, so we have different times, and the measure of locus of control, we interact with the Gini effect, so to see whether locus of control interacting with the Gini has an effect on life satisfaction. Locus of control, we cannot include, of course, because this is a fixed effect model, so I wrote it here. To remember, I have to tell you that what we do is we use a fixed effects model, and we assume that the locus of control is absorbed in the individual effect, and that's what the literature does. So in life satisfaction, it's very important to use individual fixed effects or individual random effects under certain assumptions. Because what you want to do with life satisfaction, and that's very important to have panel data, what you want to do with life satisfaction is you don't want to compare my income with your income and see who is happier. What you want to do is to follow individuals over time and see whether income changes make those individuals happier or not, right? So there are a lot of personality traits, there is a lot of attitudes. Many of us have a positive attitude, many of us have a negative attitude, and will be happier or unhappier. So what you want to get is rid of all these and look at the pure effect of the changes in the life course. So that's why you want to include individual fixed effects and exploit within individual variation. So the locus of control will be observed here. And then we have the usual, the usual variables, and we have year fixed effects and German nuts. There are 39 German nuts in Germany, so at the lower level than the Gini. And we do that to capture the variables that move together with the Gini. So, also, for the sake of a 25 minutes presentation, I'm not going to go a lot about the clustering. We have to cluster, but we only have 17 clusters, so that's a difficult one. So we have tried different things, and luckily enough, we don't find big difference. Of course, the standard errors go down, but they don't cross the significance. And we did no clustering as if it was large, block bootstrapping, rely on a distance, well, this one. And then as a robustness, we also collapse the data at the federal level to examine only the Gini effect. So the problem is that we cannot collapse our data at the state level because we are interested, of course, on locus of control, which is an individual variable. So that's our problem, but at least we can show that when we only include the Gini, collapsing the data gives rise to lower standard deviation, but the same coefficient. So these are the results. So the Gini coefficient has a negative effect on inequality. And then this effect is also replicated in the collapse data with a lower standard deviation, but this was already not very significant, as you can see it, right? And then what is more important here is that the interaction with the Gini and the locus of control has a negative effect on happiness, right? So what it means is that individuals that are external, they have a higher negative effect of Gini on happiness. That leads to say that locus of controls determines the inequality aversion of individuals. Those individuals that are external will be more inequality averse. To put it in numbers, an average respondent has this coefficient, as you have seen, but for example, for 35% of the sample, the coefficient of the Gini is positive. So this coefficient, if the locus of control is 2 point something, then this coefficient equals to this. And for those individuals that have a locus of control minus 2 point or lower, those ones will have a positive effect of Gini. So there is 35% of the sample who feel that there should be more inequality, right? Because if there is more inequality, it also, I didn't mention in the beginning the reasons why you may like inequality, but there are people who like inequality because having larger inequality gives you the opportunity to climb up in the income distribution. If everybody would have the same income, there would be no opportunities to increase and to, there would be no rewards to effort. So there is people that think that inequality is a way to reward effort. And it makes sense that the people who think that are those who also are external in the locus of control. Those people want the chance to work hard and get a better income, which will not get in an equal society. A respondent at the mean locus of control, for example, would be indifferent between a 0.5 drop of the Gini or a decrease of their own income by 7.6%. So people would be willing to give up almost 8% of their own income in order to have the Gini coefficient of their country reduced. This number, this 7.6%, is 22% if the respondents are one standard deviation from the locus of control, and 26% for those individuals that are at the top 10% of the locus of control distribution, right? So those individuals that are more external would be willing to pay 26% of their income to live in a more equal society, right? And those things should be reflected into donations, for example, charity donations. So that's the conclusions of my presentation. So what we do here is provide evidence that there are non-cognitive skills that have been found in economics to be very relevant to determine a lot of behavior decisions, and how those are also ones determining individual preferences, individual attitudes, and political voting. And this goes, as I say, this is in line with all this evidence that has already existed in economics. So our empirical evidence, instead of relying in the political questions such as, in the questionnaires they ask you, do you want to redistribute income? We don't ask people whether they want to redistribute income. We use the indirect measure of looking at the effect of the Gini on the happiness. And finally, the policy relevance is that, as I say, this helps to understand individuals' behavior, but it also helps to understand the externalities of the income distribution. And maybe, it's a way to call for evidence in favor of redistributed income to the extent that some people would be willing to give up some of their income. So that's it.